Right, okay, let's get started. Game of Phones. Why did we call it Game of Phones? Because, as we know, Game of Thrones has just returned to the screen. So we just thought we'd have a bit of a giggle and to get a little more attendance, a little more attention. So welcome once again. This is the White Hat Media sort of pretty well monthly webinar. We've looked at a lot of things in the past: content, search, social. And now we're going to be looking at mobile, but we're going to be looking at it from slightly different aspect, in the sense that rather than talk about the technology of it, which is sort of often in this type of space, we're going to be talking more about behavior, usage, that sort of thing. And I know we have in our audience my very good friend Oisin Luni, and we've done a lot of talks together. And Oisin himself is a mobile specialist, one of the few people on this planet that I actually respect in the fact that he knows what he's talking about when it comes to mobile. So hello, Oisin, and a few other good friends as well. So let's get started, because I know you guys are busy. I think it'll take about 45 minutes. I'm hoping you can hear me. If you can't, then if you could post, I will be checking the chat room just to make sure, just keep that open, just to make sure no one is having any technical issues. If you want to share this, we will be posting it on the website as usual for other people to download. I think a lot of people do that actually. They download later, and we sort of mail out who's registered and remind people that it exists. But anyway, without further ado, I am going to now try and move on. Okay, so here's a map of Westeros. I thought we'd start that. And what it struck me, and this is really interesting, I don't know if you've read the books of the Game of Thrones. I did. I actually got them on Kindle because they're enormous and very long. And I mean, there's about, I think there's 5, 6, 7 maybe books, and they're big. And the series has been going on over the last couple of years. And what actually in the books is interesting, it only actually records a short period of time in the whole of the history of Westeros. So if you read the books, you learn about some of the prehistory and so on and so forth. And that's why have I mentioned that? Because that's exactly the same with modern technology. What we often assume is that we are where we are and that's it. The now is very important. In reality, though, it's all changing. So we're only in a sort of slice, if you like, of what's actually going on. So it's really important to keep up to date with these type of things. And the truth is that a lot of what I would have told you over the webinars that we've been running over the last few months, in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time, it's all changed. So you really have to keep up to speed. And it's the same as I say in the Game of Thrones. We're only conscious of that sort of period of time. Our QR codes is a really good example. I remember, 2 or 3 years ago, everybody was talking about QR codes. Really now, you very rarely hear about them. The other similarity, I think, is that the desire to be dominant. And the desire to be dominant, there's new players coming and going in the marketplace, and everybody, and these are of course it's the map of the houses in the Game of Thrones. But dominance is really important in digital marketing, and in order to do that, it can get quite complicated. We've only got 45 minutes, and hopefully we can carry on the discussion another time. We're always here open to discussions, but in terms of the 45 minutes, it really doesn't do the whole. It's like trying to talk about the Roman Empire in 45 minutes, or indeed Game of Thrones. But hopefully we can tap into some things that matter. Oh, hang on, I've gone the wrong way now. Good old technology. Yeah, here's an interesting chart. Now, this is quite a recent chart from the Ericsson Mobility Report. And it's always nice to sort of put things in context. There's no point me telling you that mobile and so on is huge, because we all know it is. But what we're talking in billions. If you bear in mind the population of the Earth is around about 6.5, 7 billion, then it's quite remarkable that by 2020 there's going to be that many smartphone subscriptions. And if you read along the line on the bottom of this report, what's actually quite interesting, and I will read it because it's worth understanding, the number of fixed broadband users is 3 times the number of fixed broadband connections. Okay, so in other words, I have a single broadband connection in my home, but we have 3 iPads, an Xbox, half a dozen phones, smartphones, and so just to start with, that's got to be a number of different devices we're using, and that's why the number of broadband so-called users. The other thing I think this doesn't take into account is one person using multiple devices, because often, you know, I'm on a TV maybe, which is smart TV. I've got my phone beside me. So that's. But interestingly, when you look at the opposite of the situation, if we look at due to multiple usage in household, this is the opposite of the mobile phone situation, where subscription numbers exceed user numbers, and that's because many of us have multiple phones. Yeah. So in other words, we have one user with multiple phones. This is particularly noticeable when you go to the Middle East, because if you go to the Middle East, they expect you to have a local phone number, which means if you're somewhere like the Emirates and you're working with Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and Dubai, you have to have 3 separate phones, which produces quite a weird result, because you go into cafes and restaurants and there'll be people sitting there with like stacks of smartphones, stacks of mobile phones sitting next to them, because they have to have a phone for each country, for each region. And interestingly, I do the same thing. I always buy one of those, or I buy a pay-as-you-go. So I usually have 3, maybe 4 phones with me if I'm in that area, because they won't do business with you unless you've got a local number, or they're not less likely to. And that's this. So there's an interesting analogy there, where you've got one broadband account but multiple users, but one individual having multiple devices. So it's you know, it's just sort of quite weird, that one. There's lots of numbers here, but basically, you know, we're talking of billions of smartphone subscriptions and millions of router subscriptions. So there we have it. Now, when I was doing the research of this, I read a statistic that was so bizarre, I thought that I'm not going to put these in the slides because I'd need to prove it. And the statistic I read is that people on average, this is on average, look at their smartphone 150 times a day. I mean, what? That's every 6.5 minutes, by the way. And I just thought, what? That can't be right. I need to check that. But it says it's an average. You know, I'm very techie. Lots of gadgets. I think my daughter probably accounts a lot towards that statistic. But this is an interesting breakdown in profile, because you know, a lot of people talk about people that are older, you're losing their phones less. Okay, there is a difference. You know, 37% of 18 to 24-year-olds check their mobile in the last 5 minutes. 55% checked in the last 15 minutes. So really, that's 25 to 40-year-olds, and 44% overall in the last 30 minutes. So that means almost half of us have checked our phone in the last 30 minutes, which I think is a staggering statistic. And it's growing. That's the other thing. It's growing as we get more and more devices. This whole thing. So as a business, you have to take this really seriously. It's been growing quite significantly over the last few years. It's continuing to grow, and those businesses who are not got a strategy for dealing with this growth are going to lose out big time. Which also ties in with the changes in the Google. Google recently announced that this month they were going to look at sites that had not been optimized for mobile less favorably. So, you know, there's lots and lots of business reasons why one has to go beyond the basics of mobile optimization and really do things the right way. The other interesting thing, I'm sorry about the bullet points, by the way. When you're doing a webinar of this nature, I like a graphic for every point I make, but really the phones they force us to optimize, because quite frankly, when you're putting a website, you're giving someone access to a website via a device where the screen is as big as a business card, you know, unless you optimize it, you're really going to give that user an incredibly bad experience. And you know, remarkably, there are still lots and lots of business out there who just don't seem to address this fact and haven't fixed their sites for mobiles. I also think with mobiles, because we carry them with us all the time. I mean, I know we've got laptops and so on and so forth, but with our phones, they're in our back pocket, aren't they? Or they're in a, they're very close to us, and I think that makes everything much more personal. And people really do consider them as type of personal devices, and can, they customize them by adding funky cases and all this sort of thing. We are very close to our phones. And the other thing about phones, I think it's as well as being about the now, because it really is, they really are heavily used now. What's the future going to bring? And of course we're already talking about smart watches, with Apple's release of its watch, and of course things like the Pebble. So there's a sort of big crossover, so people are going to be talking at their watches or using them as phones. It's a sort of big crossover between gadgets and phones, a further crossover. Yeah. So I think again, that's just an interesting perspective. But let's just now talk a little bit about the technology. I said I wasn't going to focus too much about the technology, but in essence, you've got two primary options when you're optimizing your site. I'm talking in terms of user experience. You've got something called responsive design and you've got adaptive design. Now, there is a website that I've included on this slide called liquidapsive.com, which you can go to, and it clearly explains the difference. Having said that, it's got a little type of drop-down menu you can click on, and you resize the page that you're looking at of the actual app page, as it were, of this site, and it will show you. It's got a little drop-down menu top right, and it will show you what the page will look like with using responsive design and, of course, also adaptive design. It also talks about two other elements, which is liquid and static. And basically liquid design is where essentially the item sort of resizes and that sort of thing, and static is where it doesn't, and you end up with scroll bars and so on and so forth. But the point about this is, we can talk about, there's also a different technologies applied in responsive to adaptive, but the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, users don't care. Right? Because when users use technology, they really don't care. And apart from the sort of super geeks, they don't care the technology that drives their experience that they're getting. It's not about whether you use responsive or adaptive, really. It's actually about delivering the best experience to the users. And indeed, if there was something that evolved beyond responsive and adaptive design that gave a better user experience even than they do, then that would be the thing that the users, they don't know about, but that's what they would care about, in the simple fact that it's all about user experience and content and things like that. And so I think one doesn't really want to get too hung up. There are some key choices that you do need to make, but those choices still come down to how can you make the experience better for your customers and your potential customers. So I've just picked up a few points here. The first is that obviously, I mean, a lot of these things are sort of, of course I know that, but you actually have to say it, but a lot of people don't actually do it. Clearly, when you have a smart device like a phone or that sort of thing that halfway between the phone, a large screen smartphone or a small screen pad, obviously there are limitations of fingers, and you may have elegant slim fingers, but your friend who's fitting your kitchen may not have elegant slim fingers. She, or I say he, may have thick sausage-like fingers, and the problem is that you have to design for this, and this is what companies like Apple, who are masters of this sort of thing, and indeed Microsoft for that matter, and Amazon, realize is that you need to have, if you want people to do things, you want large, usable, as we call them, tap targets. Not quite that big, because that would be enormous. This is the one this guy's looking at, but you know what I'm talking about. Big buttons that you can press. And if you actually think about it and look at the best apps you've got, or the best websites that have been optimized for mobile, I've got some to come in a minute, that's what they do. You've got to let people or you've got to make it that people can do what they need to do or want to do really, really easily. I know it's a no-brainer and it's an obvious thing. In that case, why don't people do it properly? You know, I was thinking about this. The websites have now been around for 20 years. So how come so many of them are so bad, you know, when it comes to user experience and content? I mean, and now, as I said, we're now into a new area. We're into an area where mobile devices dominate, and a lot of people haven't even got their website sorted out properly yet. I'm sure you guys have. I hope you have anyway after some of the webinars, but this is as an obvious thing to say. The other thing, remove unnecessary clutter. I mean, actually, that's a general rule of thumb when creating a website. You know, if you go to a website, or the good websites, you don't need to have all that extra guff and stuff. And I personally think that Google are the masters in this, and indeed, again, Apple. They, you know, Steve Jobs apparently he didn't even want an on-off switch when he was developing the iPhone. You know, which I think is amazing. But if you think about it, why do you need one? You know, if you can keep the thing on all the time and it doesn't hose the battery. But Google, I think, are remarkable, because when Google was launched in around '97, then it sort of got big in about 2000. There were other search engines around. I remember there was one called Alta Vista, and Alta Vista did have a clean design, and then they decided to go crazy, and they started having categories. So you had to choose a category when you hit the search engine, and needless to say, it was one of the reasons that buried them. You know. Whereas if you look at, if you think what Google does, what it could do, they could put a lot of guff on that page, but it's a very simple page, and because it's simple, it's very, very clever. And this is the actual what you see when you go to Google. Google are very heavily into mobile. And there's actually a ton of articles on a website I think I mentioned before called Think with Google. So if you go into Think with Google and key in mobile, you'll be taken to all sorts of research, white papers, videos, all sorts of great stuff if you want to learn more. So another key thing here, and again, I had a look at a lot of for research in terms of preparing this little webinar. I look at a lot of white papers and research, and I was trying to sort of distill it all down into a short format. But enable quick task, which is different from not having clutter. Just if you know that you want someone to do something, or someone wants to do something, then make it really easy. And what I particularly like here, enable quick task, what Google are trying to do at the moment is they're trying to push their audio technology, because they do realize that, you know, if they can get people talking to their devices, then they're going to use them more often. They're going to use them while driving. They're going to use them while doing something else with their hand, eating or something like that. So they are encouraging people. One of the things they want to do is encourage people to try audio. So what do? They've highlighted there's very little you can do on this page. You can change the format of the search from web to images. You can sign in into your Google account, or you can try the audio, and that's it. That's you know, there's nothing else really on this page per se apart from a logo. And again, when you're thinking about working on your own optimization for your own, I'm talking about user experience rather than SEO at the moment, you know, look at that. You want no clutter, and you want to enable people to do quick tasks. Consider download speed. Now here in the Western Europe, I would say we do experience good broadband, but in fact I'm still waiting for Infinity to be accessible where I live in Arundel. But there are places, a lot of places, where, you know, the broadband isn't so great. And if you travel at all, or if you're targeting a market where they don't have super fast broadband, then think about that, because people are not going to be so likely to be watching or downloading large files, watching slow videos, that sort of thing. And I think this has really got to start with the lowest common denominator, in the sense that obviously to reach a wider market possible, you've got to think economy when it comes to content and file sizes. Again, it's a no-brainer. Again, it's obvious. but then it's also amazing how so many people, or not so many businesses or brands, don't adhere to that, and you end up with really nightmare type of downloads. Or people email each other, 25 meg files, which is balmy if you've got not so great broadband. Okay, I also think there should be some either automatic synchronization, as in apps like Dropbox or services like Dropbox, or a manual. I think the synchronization, but both have their upside and downside. The problem with synchronization is it may be a scenario where someone doesn't want something to synchronize. As I found out when I tried to synchronize with a new laptop that didn't have quite the space of the previous laptop I had, and basically shut the thing down. That's what Dropbox did, so I had to turn off the synchronization. Although synchronization, generally speaking, is a good thing, where you've got device agnostic, so you see content on one device, you can go to another device, you see the same content, and so on and so forth. But these days, this will probably change in the fullness of time when we do have proper big fat broadband. But right now, a lot of people do like to read things offline. In fact, I started my career on the internet in working on something called an offline reader back in '92, which was pre-web, and that was simply because in those days, people were ramping up massive great phone bills by accessing the internet. Even today, people like to be able to download stuff. So provide a facility, an easy facility, not somewhere where they have to rummage around all over the web pages to download stuff. I find it quite irritating with some of the apps I've got that don't actually need to access the internet, and yet insist on doing so, and particularly when you're in an aircraft or something, X thousand feet up in the sky, and you want to access this app and you can't, simply because it has to connect to a server somewhere, and it can't because you're actually in an aircraft. So as I said, think about the way people use things, and this is really the theme of the whole talk, actually, is put the customer first. Now, this is an interesting one, so it comes back to my fat fingers thing. Controls shouldn't be too close together. So it's not just a case of having buttons that are easily pressable. It's also having buttons that have enough space between them, so that when somebody goes and taps on something or clicks on something, they're not hitting the wrong thing. And this is, by the way, one of the biggest problems of not optimizing your site for mobiles. One of the biggest problems is that, if you just present the website, even on something like an iPad or a Surface, you've still got, probably a menu bar that's got hyperlinks on it that are so close together. You've got to constantly use your finger and thumb to make it bigger and then slightly, and then make it smaller slightly, just to be able to click on a hyperlink to get to another page. And that's just ridiculous. So when you are creating your web pages or anything, it could be an app, but I'm mostly talking about web pages at the moment, for a mobile device, then make sure that the controls are usable, basically, without fiddling around and using fingers and thumbs to expand or minimize pages. Which brings me on to, I don't know if you remember how, when in the early days of Windows applications, you had all sorts of different ways of doing things and menu items, and Microsoft didn't really like that, so they started developing sort of style guides and started insisting. And yes, there are a ton of apps out there that don't adhere to the standards, but there is standard usage that you should be thinking about. So if you are, again, optimizing web pages or indeed applications, then it's a really good idea to use the standard usage and not get silly and clever. Now, the problem about getting silly and clever is that people build expectations, and if the 99 pages they've been on, they've been perfectly standard, and then suddenly the 100th page they go on to is yours and it's not standard, they just get confused. And people who are confused when they hit web pages, generally speaking, leave them, as I did once with a very well-known watch manufacturer that had its menu bar built in Flash, so that it just, every time you tried to click on it, you were chasing it around the screen until you just gave up in frustration. So basically, the key here again, and again, these are obvious points. I know these are obvious points, but people don't adhere to them, and that's really why I'm mentioning that. So let's actually look at a site, just a page here, and how it might, or how it should, or how it does appear in mobile, and compare the two factors between a standard website. And again, I've kept it straightforward deliberately because this is a webinar. You're busy people. You've probably taken a lunch out to watch this. And the difference between this and doing stuff for mobile. Okay, so generally speaking, websites are built for larger screens. Yeah, so currently I'm doing this particular presentation on a laptop. It's a Dell. It's got a nice big screen. It looks about 15 inches. And generally speaking, when one creates websites, it's a traditional website, I guess you could say, generally speaking, it's for larger screens. In fact, what's quite interesting actually is if you look on, I do some browsing sometimes at home with my Xbox, and often when you go up to a 42-inch screen, it's a TV, the website just looks absolutely appalling. So it goes the other way as well. So it's not primarily. So people are thinking laptops, workstations, and so on and so forth. So that's the first sort of concept. The second one is, generally speaking, on web pages, you can get away with having more content. Yeah, and here's the catch-22, because some research done by various websites into what Google likes. Google actually does like more content in terms of search. So there's the irony, because they're pushing mobile. They're heavily into mobile. In fact, they've even bought Motorola, as you probably know. But at the same time, their own search engine provides more content. And a normal traditional website, generally speaking, is going to have more content. I mean, look along that menu bar for a start. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 9 different links, and then probably below there quite a lot of other stuff. So again, this is all obvious. Vertical, horizontal scrolling, often you see that, and not so much horizontal, but vertical scrolling obviously all the time. But you do see horizontal scrolling of pages and so on and so forth. And then you can have larger file sizes, because obviously, generally speaking, people are in offices. A lot of people have access or decent broadband, not moving around, not relying on mobile signals, GPS, that sort of thing. So therefore, that's the thing. Now, the difference is this is the same website, yeah, the same. I wouldn't say exactly the same, because it's not exactly the same, because they've optimized it for mobiles. And this is the same website viewed with a mobile device, and of course the difference is it's mostly for smaller screens. And if you get a business card out now and overlay it, put it on your phone, you'll find that it's highly likely that your smartphone, unless you've got a large screen smartphone, actually what's in there is the size of your business card, which is really remarkable. It's actually remarkable how much you can do with that as well. And even the fact that Apple have launched a watch that does all these clever things, and the screen is even smaller. Less content. Again, it's probably obvious, but you don't need all the other guff that there was on the web page, and so you're aiming for less content. And more on that a little bit later in a moment or two. Mostly vertical scrolling. I put mostly because if you, for example, go to the App Store on the iPhone, there is vertical scrolling to look at the images, but mostly vertical scrolling rather than more so than, if you like, traditional websites. And then large calls to action. Again, we've just talked about that. So bigger buttons. Now, if you think about it, again, adhering to our type of minimalist approach of having really clear buttons and really clear things to do, I would even argue maybe that finer center on this particular example, request a quote and recent work, are slightly too close together. I'd probably test that to see what works, maybe make the buttons even slightly bigger than they are. But that's a very simple approach, and one that works for Snap. So just to reiterate, and this is, if you like, a checklist, and I would absolutely love to have the opportunity to discuss this in more detail with you, but as I say, I've got you only for a short period of time. Usability, we've covered. So legibility. Now, the other problem you get with just not optimizing web page or pages is the font sizes. I mean, sometimes they are so small. And, I wear specs, but I still, you just can't see these tiny font sizes. You just can't read them half the time. Image size, again, the image size, what's that? It's a blob, it's a blur. Site navigation is really important. That's explained, because if you, on the two previous examples, you'll see there's much more navigation in the traditional web page than there is in the mobile. So that has to be fixed. You have to have much simpler navigation. Page structure itself, so the way the pages are actually created, going back to responsive and adaptive design, and of course the scrolling, which we've already talked about. So what are the advantages? Well, if you think about it, as I say, why should you do this? You should do this because if you have a brand or a business, people who are accessing your site are now much more on the move. We are literally, with cost of air flights dropping, with travel now growing, and with amount of traveling people do for business, which is a bit bizarre considering we've got the internet, because actually you could do less traveling if you wanted to and just use the web if we had super fast broadband. But people do travel more, they're on the move more, and so there's an immediacy. So people, as I've said, people are checking their phones every 30 minutes. They're not checking their laptops or their workstations if they're not in front of them every 30 minutes. They heave something out of their briefcase or their case and start looking at it. So there's this immediacy, and you can get to people really fast. And actually, I think that one of the reasons for the phenomenal growth of sites like Twitter is actually because it was in parallel with the growth of mobile, so that news now can spread around the world in a minute, literally a minute, faster than the news agencies can get hold of it. And that's because of mobile phones, smartphones, or cell phones, as they say in the US, and sites like Twitter. Compatibility, I think with Oisin may disagree here. I'd love to discuss this with him. But I think with compatibility, the standards are clearer. Yes, I know there are multiple operating systems, say with phones like Android, but the actual compatibility of things like browsers and so on is much more standardized than it was, in normal desktops. Desktops, you can get different resolutions, different ways of, and you can to a degree in smartphones, and phones rather, not just smartphones, mobile phones, but not so much. A broader reach, and I think the reach here, it's also broader reach for obvious reasons, the ones we've already named, such as immediacy, but also I think it's better for certain demographics. Again, particularly the 18 to 35 or 18 to 30, but even in the older demographic in terms of the age segmentation, the smartphone is the de facto device for everything, for entertainment, for reading books, for research, for work. And therefore one has to go with what is happening at the moment, which is exactly that, as we've seen. I think the other thing it's important to do, and I think these analytics are slightly out of date, but is actually monitor the popularity of the different devices, just to see, because I think it's important to see what's going on in terms of popularity of devices, because it does ebb and flow. And I think Samsung particularly are doing particularly well at the moment with the gadgets they've brought out, again because Android is much more ubiquitous, less proprietary than iOS. So the whole plethora of Android devices out there are gaining real traction in terms of popularity. And again, I think when you come down to your testing, which is something we'll talk about in a minute, testing makes sure that you do actually test on various devices. And there are some websites that you can do auto sort of testing of your web pages to check what they look like on the various devices. Okay, a big question is apps. Whenever one starts talking about smartphones or mobiles, smartphones actually, one always gets into the subject of apps. My caveat to you is just be careful before you build an app. The number of businesses I've met, brands I've met, where you walk in the door and they say, we want an app. And you say, okay, so what sector you're in? Oh, you're in the healthcare sector, you're into fitness, or you're into retail, or you're into whatever. And actually, we did some research for a client we had into the fitness sector, how many apps there are. At the time, and this was about 2 years ago, there were 6,500 apps in that space. So you need a good reason to create an app. There's a lot of work going on in preventative healthcare. So you'll find out that what's happening in the healthcare sector rather than the fitness sector is that you can get various apps that will sort of check your pulse and check your body vital signs and that sort of thing, usually with another slight gadget added to it. The one I particularly like is Wello. I don't know if you're familiar with it. There's some pretty cool apps out there. But those are apps, and I think the average amount of money I read somewhere that an app makes is $4,000, and the average cost to build one is $70,000. So Angry Birds was not the first one they developed. I think it was a fifth or sixth. So developing an app is both a good thing to do, but also a very dangerous thing to do unless you want to throw money away. So be very careful. I also think that developing a brand-specific app, as so many brands are doing, has to be done with care as well, because our people, how many apps do you actually use? I own 300. I use 8. So, how many apps do you actually use on your phone? And HTML5, on the other hand, is much more less platform dependent because it's HTML, and in essence, done properly, it can do everything, or pretty well everything that apps can do. And I think HTML5 is probably the way it's going to go. Who knows, though? Who knows? But I'm just saying there's a caveat here when it comes to creating apps, because they take time, cost money, the good ones anyway, and you may not recover that. Okay, so key aspects, obviously put consumers first. I only have 2 lines on this. One is, what do your consumers want? It's classic, Tim Berners-Lee, he said the only things we're limited by is the human imagination, because what they identify what people want, and then quite simply use a technology or the search engine optimization or the user experience that serves this. So, but it starts with, what do the customers want? So when you're thinking about your mobile strategy, the very first question I would think is, okay, because I don't know, I do know, I'll have a look at the list later, but there are various sectors I'm talking to right now, and each sector will have different needs and requirements. So if you're business to business, generally speaking, they want information, they want to be educated a bit, whereas if you're business to consumer, they often want a little bit of entertainment, they want engagement, and so on and so forth. And there's no hard line between that. There's a very much overlap there, but put the consumers first. So if we were consulting to you, first thing I'd say is let's make a list. Let's sit down and think about what the consumers want. And this opens up a whole new another sector, which is, have you asked your customers what they want? Have you asked your customers what they want from your website? Have you asked your customers what they want? Have you researched your customers to find out how they use mobiles? And if the answer is no, maybe it's something worth doing. Okay. Nonetheless, everything I've said with regards to apps, they still continue to dominate the web. And you can see there that, something like time spent in terms of with devices, this obviously I can't tell you about 2015, but in fact, the proportion of time people spend with mobile devices using apps versus the proportion of time they spend actually on the web per se. And this is something Tim Berners-Lee's even commented on, actually, because, if I think about my own children, for example, they're in WhatsApp, Snapchat, and so on and so forth. Websites, not so much, you know what I mean? Website, they'll probably go into the study, sit down with a laptop. And this is the way, and what's interesting about this is that there seem to be more people, and this I know goes a little bit contra to what I was saying about HTML5 versus apps, but I think it's the apps that are people using and how they're using those apps as well. And it's sort of watch this space and keep up to things, but certainly it's quite interesting, this massive dominance of apps over time spent on the web, according to these guys. Flurry. And again, this doesn't surprise me, being a bit of an online gamer myself. I say I'm an online gamer, I don't play poker or anything like that online, I think it's bonkers. But I've been an online game for 20 years, and actually it's quite interesting because a lot of the technologies and communication protocols and so on are developed in that area. If you look at the time spent on iOS and Android, which are the dominant players in this field, you can see that 32% of the time is on gaming. Now that could be anything from, as I say, Angry Birds to other first-person shooters or whatever, all sorts of quiz games and so on and so forth. So most of the people, or rather most of the time specifically. And then if you look round, again, you've got the way it's broken down, that 14% is via browser. So you've still got Safari being the dominant browser. And then, of course, you've got social media being very dominant down around that right-hand corner from about 1 o'clock round to 6 o'clock. You've got that big social media chunk there. So, if you wanted to summarize it, you've got just over 30% of gaming, around about the same proportion in terms of social media. You then got around about 40% there in terms of browsing, and then everything else, and that would include business to business and that sort of thing, all crammed into that last 25% or thereabouts. So, you know, in terms of a strategy to be able to work within those parameters, it's really important that you get things right. Now, my colleague here, Charlie, has just pointed out to me the time, so I'm going to basically just wrap up here. So we've talked about knowing your audience. As I said, that's the first thing you need to do, and then you set up the technology to deliver that. Can't believe already about 5 minutes has gone. And then you identify what they want, and then you work around that. And some of the key concepts of behavior in mobile I've covered in terms of clutter, big buttons, and those sort of things. And so, again, we've got access anywhere when you've got a mobile. Okay, so that's a big plus. Quick response. This is a key point, actually. People get very, very impatient very, very quickly. Not just generally on the web, because they do on the web anyway, but particularly so with mobile technology. So you need to test things, because people are incredibly intolerant or intolerant of stuff that doesn't work. They will leave immediately. And so it's test, 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 and then test again. Again, you know, do we do that? Often it gets overlooked. Often it gets missed out, but it's really important to do that. And it's got to be intuitive and easy. It really keep it simple. Yeah, keep it straightforward. Keep it uncluttered. Don't try and get clever with it. Keep it, you know, clean, easy to use. Okay. And then obviously think about resource management. You know, if you don't ask people to download stuff, it's going to take hours and hours and hours, hammer their phones power, because they're just not going to do that. I'm going to like you for it. In terms of a few final bullet points, I'm sorry about the bullet points, but I just wanted to touch on search, right? So 64%, or around 64% of users use their mobile device to search. Okay, so key thing there. Now, interestingly, the principles that adhere to search for mobile is different slightly, but essentially the principles are the same in terms of the tagging that you need to use and the backlinking strategies and that sort of thing, which we have covered in a previous webinar. But you know, more than ever now, it's terms of optimization, and optimization properly for mobile. Obviously local, because smartphones can localize where you are to using GPS much more accurately than using, say, IP addresses. So you need to make sure that you're using universal search properly, so that when people are searching for you, especially if you own a chain of restaurants or a chain of stores or something like that, you're going to be higher in those results. And also landing pages. Okay, so look at those landing pages again. How good are they performing? And again, use your analytics to find out whether there's a choke point. Interestingly, we're working on a couple of clients right now, new clients who've got problems with their so-called funnel. So they're getting people to the website, but they're not converting. So we're looking to see why those people aren't converting. Yeah, and there'll be an answer. So much smaller screen size. Again, this is talking about ads now. Again, landing pages, and is the phone number clickable? So there's extra functionality, of course, you can add when you are optimizing for mobile. Below the fold, it's actually got, because of the way that the search engine results pages resolve with a smartphone, it's harder to be above the fold. Yeah, simply because you get the sponsored links or the AdWord type of ads higher up the fold. It pushes the organic results lower. What do we do? Very simple. Again, this is pretty well the last slide. We can review your current strategy. Okay, I'll be more than happy to do that. Of course, we can plan and refine a new strategy that you can adopt with all of the things mentioned in mind. We can work with you on reach and have a look at your data and how we can get to more of your customers, or more customers for you. We can consult to you about building a mobile site, or we can actually build it for you, whichever you prefer. We can also do the same with content. So we can set testing up for your sites, and basically we can take away the stress of a lot of these new highly competitive arenas. And we can train, of course, and we can help you measure all the results of all the work. So if you need to talk to us, by all means, pick the phone up, send me an email, DM me on LinkedIn. However, no obligation, we don't do the heavy sell stuff. This is how we reach out to people through our webinars, our content. Just give us a call and we'll come and meet you if we can, or if you're abroad, then we can set up conference calls, that sort of thing. We're well set up for that. Love to talk to you. If you want a free ebook on mobile, just mail this email address, which is jeremy@whitehatmedia.com, and just put in the title word mobile. And if I know you, say hi. Or if I don't know you, say hi. I don't mind. We're very friendly people. I believe we're good at what we do, and I'm pretty confident we'll be able to help you. And at the end of the day, you can have a free ebook anyway. And we do lots of free ebooks, lots of free webinars, and we enjoy doing them. What goes round comes round. Okay, finally, which I thought, well, I started one of the map of Westeros. Now, she hasn't made it there yet, but that's the whole thing, isn't it? Even if she does make it there, she probably, knowing Game of Thrones, won't last for very long. They do seem to like slaughtering characters on a regular basis. Just to tell you a little bit about the future, as I mentioned, I have read all the books, and I can't remember the author now. What's his name? I'm sure it'll come to me in a minute. But the guy, I think he's got 2 more books to write, so none of us actually know what's going to happen. But I've got a sneaky feeling that the White Walkers will actually come further south somehow. And as was hinted in the earlier series, winter is coming. So who knows? I think she'll probably make it there, but whether that will be the very last scene or whether something awful happens on the way or even when she gets there, who knows? That's all the excitement of such a brilliant series. And in a sense, that's the fun of working with digital as well, because let's be honest, we all love it because we don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow morning. Well, maybe we know a bit, but we certainly don't know what's going to be happening in a year's time. And it's all great fun. Anyway, in a moment, I'm just going to, what else? Oh, questions. I'm just going to check for some questions. If anybody, don't worry if you haven't asked a question, which you haven't, oh, no, hang on, you might have done. Let's have a look there. Oisin, hi, yeah, man, that's great to see you. And we must get together that drink. And welcome to everybody else. Yeah, there's go to webinar. Okay, we'll move on, but if you have a question, by all means, email me, direct message me, link in, ask on whatever media you like, but send me that question. And if you want to come and talk to us about your mobile strategy with absolutely no heavy sell, no obligation to do anything, just a half-hour chat or an hour chat, or by phone, wherever you like, give us a shout, because we're very passionate about this sort of thing, and we really want the web to be a better place. That sounds a bit cheesy, but I mean it. I've seen too many lousy websites in my life. Not that yours are, of course. Okay, now I have to go. This is my contact details. You've got my email address there. Don't, if you post on Twitter, probably best not to message me, because I tend to get I'm flooded with the damn things. But if you mention my name, then I'll see it and I'll be able to come back to you. But you've got my email address anyway. LinkedIn, love LinkedIn, don't we all? So LinkedIn, contact there if you want to link in. That's the business phone number, 08445 440 223, and that's the web address if you want to come and see. We're always publishing new stuff. And thank you very much for coming to the webinar, and we'll be running another one in about a month's time. Charlie will get in touch with you and send you, or I will, and send you the details of that. And we've decided to start naming them a bit more imaginatively. So who knows? Breaking Bad, I don't know, but we'll come up with some other interesting title of our next webinar. And yeah, have a good day. We got the bank holiday here in the UK, so if you've got the bank holiday weekend coming up, have a wonderful and relaxing bank holiday weekend. And obviously, if you're not in the UK, then also have a wonderful and relaxing weekend. And hopefully we'll speak soon. Thanks very much for your time. Bye now.